Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Charlie and I read a book, and today I'm going to talk to you about that book. This is going to be the first book review, the first formal review of a book that I do here on the channel. I was initially thinking that I would do this on like a smaller book, like one that less people have heard about, because for whatever reason I was like nervous about doing a review, but the book or the series really that I wanted to review, not super fresh in my mind, so I got to do more of a refresher before I do that. I still want to do that one, but first I want to talk about this book that is the most recent read for me, and that is Brandon Sanderson's Wind and Truth, which you probably know if you saw the title of the video and the thumbnail and the intro, B-roll, but whatever. We're here. I am going to be trying to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible, with the caveat of I will be mentioning characters in this book. I'm gonna assume that you read books 1 through 4 of the Stormlight Archives, because this is book 5. This is the most recent book in the Stormlight Archives series by Brandon Sanderson. I won't assume you've read anything else in the Cosmere, so I'm not going to talk about anything that could be connected by a different book outside of this series specifically, but I will mention some stuff that's happened in previous books, or at least I might mention those. I don't know. I'm not going to try not to mention things that happen in books 1 through 4. Specifically, I'll be talking about relationships that exist if I talk about anything, and character names maybe that have shown up in those previous books. But realistically, if you have not read Wind and Truth, I think this video should be fine for you. I'm going to be trying to make it accessible to people who have not read this book yet and are just looking for some quick thoughts before they pick it up. If you know yourself and you know that you are hyper spoiler sensitive, then you might want to look away, but like I said, I'm going to be doing my best here. I will be mentioning characters that are in this book, and if there are obvious pairings of people and Spren, for example, I'll mention that. It's not going to be a surprise that Kaladin had a conversation with Syl, for example, but I won't mention that this person and this person are off on a journey together. First thing I want to get out of the way, or kind of just be upfront with, is that this is going to be a very positive review of Wind and Truth, but I am going to be talking a lot about my small gripes that I had, or the flaws that I did find in it, partially because I think it's just easier to talk about the flaws in a spoiler-free review than it is to talk about the pros, because a lot of the things that I liked I can't really be super specific about, so it's harder to do. So when I was planning this out, I was thinking a lot more about the small issues that I did take with the overall story. But again, I want to be very clear. I loved this book. I had a really good time with this book. Is it my favorite book in the series? No, I don't think so. I don't think it is the best Stormlight Archives book, but it's definitely not the worst. It's definitely one of the better ones for sure. It's a very strong book. I've tried really hard to avoid watching too many reviews or reading too many of other people's criticisms, but there's a lot on the internet already, because a lot of people are already talking about this book. So I've seen the headlines, I've seen the video titles and the thumbnails, and so I know a little bit of what issues people have had with the book, but I've tried to keep my thoughts as much my own as possible, at least until I put this out there, and then I'll probably scour the internet for other people's in-depth spoiler-filled thoughts on the book. Of the criticisms that I've seen so far, I do think that I agree with some of what people said, but I disagree with some of the other, or really, I don't know that I disagree with some of the other stuff, but there are things that people took issue with that didn't bother me at all when I was reading this. So I'll be touching on some of that as well. The first example of that specific kind of thing, something that I've seen people criticize about this book that I have not had an issue with at all, is the overall writing. I've heard people say that the writing felt weaker in this book than in other Sanderson books, and the editing too. People said that it needed another edit, or more editing done throughout the book. I did not pick up on any of that. Maybe I wasn't reading it with a super critical eye when I was going through it. That's possible, but I didn't at all ever think like, oh man, this writing is weak, or this really needed to be edited more. I've never read Brandon Sanderson for his beautiful wordplay or anything like that. Like I read Brandon Sanderson's books for the story and for the characters and for the world building, and this delivered on all of those fronts, at least in my opinion. But this whole review is my opinion, so you know that already. I also know that people are going to come at the humor in this book, and I'm not going to defend the humor in this book, but again, it's not something that bothers me because, again, I don't read Brandon Sanderson for his humor. I know that his humor doesn't usually connect with me, and that's okay. I don't care about that. That doesn't bother me. It doesn't take me out of the experience at all. Maybe, I filter it out. It doesn't bother me one bit. Again, I'm here for the story. I'm not here for the laughs. I don't I don't assume that I'm going to be laughing my way through this book. It's not like a comedy series. Some of it lands and most of it probably does not. Again, I don't find that distracting. I guess I've already started the review and I've already started going in on these negatives, so I'll just continue in on that. As in all of Brandon Sanderson's books, really, but especially the Stormlight Archives books, this book is filled with really intense and powerful character moments. But there was one in particular that just didn't work for me at all. Like I can't give you a ton more on that. And obviously I can't be specific, and I'm not going to tell you whose moment it was, or it's one of this character's moments, but it did not land with me. And not only did it not land with me, but it rubbed me kind of the wrong way, or like I was distracted in this one scene by how long we were taking to get to the point, or almost really like I got the point early on and then we just kept going, and I felt like I know where this is going. I'm not interested in hearing about how we get there. Just get there already. And it felt like it went on for probably much longer than it actually did, but it bugged me. And I know that sounds funny to talk about like this one scene that I had a problem with in this 100+ page book that I read, right? This thing is huge. Having a problem with one scene is not a big deal. There's a lot of scenes in this book, but I think that's kind of why this is something that I want to bring up in my negatives, is that this scene was so weak, in my opinion, that it has stood out. It's like the scene I think about most when I think about how I liked this book is this one, all things considered, small scene. I mean, it had a big impact by the end of it, but it just dragged on. And I like the character that this moment is happening for, like the main character that is the scene revolves around. I like them historically, but this scene felt almost overdone. It felt like things were being over-explained to me when I was reading it. But looking back, I think that the scene was just made overly complicated. Like the issue at hand was given a level of complexity that it didn't need. Like it just could have been streamlined. It didn't need to be so convoluted. It wasn't hard to follow, but because it was made so complicated, it needed to be thoroughly explained. And so it was, but I think by the end of it, it did feel like it was over-explained. Like, I got it. And maybe that sort of thing could work if the topic or like the subject matter of the scene was something that I found interesting, but I didn't find this part interesting anyway. So, I just, it bugged me. It still bugs me. And it was a big scene, really, by the end of it. Like, it should have had a big impact on me, but it didn't, and I wanted it to. By the end of it, I just didn't care, and I was just glad that it was over. I think it definitely could have been just like cut down by a lot. Like, it didn't need to be given as many pages as it was given. And sort of on that note of things being cut down, it has to be talked about how long this book is, right? I want to address the page count, because like I said, this is over 1,300 pages long. At least the copy that I have in my hand is over 1,300 pages long. And did it need to be over 1,300 pages long? I don't think so. I really don't. I feel like I'm satisfied with it, and I feel like the length of the book, like, it earned it kind of by the end. But looking back, I do think that there was a lot of things that could have been removed. And I know that Sanderson said that he did remove a lot before putting the book out, but I feel like he could have gone a little further. Just, we didn't need it all. I kind of, and this might be, my hot take of this video. I kind of feel like this book, and maybe the last couple of Stormlight Archives books as well, is so long because the Stormlight Archives at this point has such a reputation for having these big books. So I feel like the page count, like the target page count, was set before the ideas were all laid into place, which is probably not true because Brandon Sanderson plans very thoroughly, but that's how it felt to me. Like it just was trying to reach a goal. It was just trying to be the biggest book. And it is the biggest book I've ever read. That's for sure, by a lot. But I don't think it needed to be that long. Again, I loved this book, and I really didn't have any problem while I was reading it with the length. Like, I didn't feel like I'm dragging myself through this book. I didn't feel like I'm forcing myself to pick it up. I wish this book was over. That didn't happen. Save for that one scene, I never felt like I was dying to get to the end of this chapter, to the end of the book in general. That really didn't happen. I had a lot of fun with this, but it could have been shorter. And if it was, I don't think I would have lost anything, or the impact would still have been there, or all of the impacts, because there were a lot of impactful moments throughout the story. But I don't think we would have lost those things if we didn't have some of the other things. Is that vague enough for you? In particular, and I don't know if this is going to be a popular opinion. I think it will be a popular opinion, and I'll find out more after I put this video up and I do my deep dive into other people's reviews. But there was one POV in particular, a POV from a character that I generally like in the other books where they've come up. I've liked their chapters. I've liked learning about them and their story and all that. I think they're interesting, but I could not tell you one thing about what happened in their storyline. Like, the whole book, I was reading it and it was fine and whatever, but looking back, I don't think that I actually cared about any of it. Like, the end of it was probably big. Like, I think it's going to be impactful. I think it set up a lot in the story, like the overarching story of the Stormlight Archives. But although the destination was good, the journey was kind of maybe meandering, or maybe just, I don't know, I just didn't care about it, I guess. Now, I know I just said that I never felt like I needed a chapter to end other than that one scene, and then I'm saying this, but that is still true. When I was in this POV, it still didn't bother me. Like, I still didn't feel like I needed to move on, but there were times when I was reading, again, in these chapters or these scenes, and my eyes would glaze over, or, I'd find my mind wandering and whatever, and then I'd catch myself, and I wouldn't even go back. Like, I wouldn't even, hit rewind on the audiobook or go back a page or two to refresh or to reread the things that I missed, because I just didn't feel like it mattered, or I didn't feel like I was interested in that anyway, and that's why I wandered and whatever. I won't need that. And you know what? By the end, I didn't need it. I don't think I missed anything, nothing big, at least. Like, I understand how they got there to the end of their storyline, and that's cool. But I don't feel like I missed out by not hyper focusing on their scenes. It didn't impact my overall understanding of what was happening by the end. And I think that kind of means that it could have just been removed or truncated, at least. Really, I don't need this POV to have been stripped entirely from this book necessarily, because some of it was good, particularly the end of the storyline, but it could have been truncated, cut it into a fraction of what it was by the end, and then maybe just stick it in as some interlude chapters. Maybe that would have been fine. Just a couple of the interludes could have been focused on this character and their journey, and that would have been fine. They could still be in, the final part of the book. You could have a big chapter on them and how it ended and whatever, and that'd be fine. But yeah, I just didn't need it throughout the entirety of this book. I think that's fair. And then there's one more thing that I'll talk about before I talk about the things that I loved about this book. And there's a lot that I love about this book. I want to, again, reiterate that. I want to be clear. I love this book. But one more thing. And this one's actually, honestly, not even really a negative from me. But it's just a thing. It's a thing that I noticed that I wanted to mention, but I don't know how to feel about it yet, I guess, at this point. Like, it wasn't a negative, but it's not a positive. It's definitely not a positive. If you've read the Stormlight Archives up to this point, which I'm assuming, again, that you have, even if you hadn't, again, not a huge spoiler, but this series deals with a lot of mental health issues and mental disorders and things in that vein. That's like a big focus of this series. And it's very upfront about that very early on, that is, what we're covering in these books. I love that. That's great. I think that is really hard to do. It's tricky, I think, to find the balance of kind of your opinions on how these things work or what you think you should tell somebody when they're going through this struggle that you're writing about with what you actually should do and what like research shows you should do, or how to or how not to handle this situation. I think that's hard, and I think Brandon Sanderson has historically done a really good job of that, but I think we've gotten to the point where maybe he's done too much research, because he does talk to a lot of experts that know about the subject matter that he's writing about, because he has not experienced all of these mental health issues that our characters are being faced with. So I think it's a responsible thing that he does, where he will talk to experts in the field or people that have struggled with those things, and he really tries to build an understanding, and then he puts it into the book. But here it felt too much to me sometimes, like I could tell he did that research. Does that make any sense? Like I could feel that he went to somebody, asked them what they would do in this situation. They told him, and then he copied and pasted it. Like, here's what you should say to somebody who's struggling with this specific thing. And then he just, copied, paste. And that was it. And it took me a little bit out of the Stormlight Archives when that sort of thing happened. So there were several times where I felt like I was removed from the world that I was in just a second ago, and I found myself just like grounded back in reality, which again, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, because again, these are really sensitive topics, but I felt like he was maybe just a little too heavy-handed with some of the themes that he was discussing. He had something he needed to say or wanted to say, and he said it, but he said it. Like, Kaladin didn't say it, and Shallan didn't say it, and Dalinar didn't say it, but Brandon Sanderson said it. All that being said, this book was terrific, like I've mentioned several times already. I don't think it had as punchy of a Sanderlanche, like compared to the rest of Brandon Sanderson's books, but I kind of feel like that's because it was written maybe more like a standard book. Like the big moments were more spread out throughout the book, which I liked. I mean, I love a Sanderlanche. Like, I love reading a big chunky book, and then at the end, it's just like boom, 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 intense. Everything's happening all at once, and I think that's a really fun way to do these big finale of endings that Brandon Sanderson is known for at this point. But I also really enjoyed this different style, or at least it felt different to me, where it was kind of intense all the way through. Not too intense. Like, it never got to like the highs that I feel like I usually feel by the end of a Sanderson book, but like the highs were a little bit lower, like a little more managed, but there were more of them, and they were spread throughout the story. And that's not to say that the ending was not fantastic, because it was, but it just didn't feel like it was as punchy is all. I don't know if that's going to be a popular opinion or a thought that is shared by others. Maybe other people did think that it had a Sanderlanche just like the rest, and maybe I'm crazy, but that's what I thought. And that's a positive for me, for sure. I thought that was really great. I think it made the pace really good. I thought the pace in this book was fantastic. Like it just kept going. Even when I was in that POV that I talked about that I didn't really care for, it didn't really matter, because the pacing was so good that I knew I would be out of this in a second and back into the action, like back into a POV that I do like, or a scene that I will find really interesting. I'll find myself back in the middle of something that I am thoroughly enjoying. I love these characters. The characters in the Stormlight Archives are so good. Almost all of them are terrific. All the characters that I loved before I picked up this book, I continue to love after. And the characters, a lot of the ones that I like, have been elevated by so much in this story. Like, I've always liked Adolin. Adolin's a cool guy, but in the Wind and Truth, Adolin is like top tier. Where he ended up, how he got there, his relationship with Maya was super interesting. It was all so good. At least it all worked for me, like, really well. It was exactly what I wanted, and I didn't even know that I wanted it, but it was exactly what we needed from this character to make him fully, like, well-rounded, like some of the other headliners in these books. Like, Kaladin was terrific here. Yasna was great here. Zeth was great here. All of their character arcs were really well done, and they were all so satisfying by the end. All of them, not just the ones I mentioned. I am fully satisfied with the way that each character's story came to a close in this book. I kind of feel like the 4 books prior to this one, each were, like, this is Kaladin's book, this is Shallan's book, right? They felt like they were dedicated to a character, while this book feels more like it was just a love story to the whole cast. I've been dying for more information about Renarin for 4 massive books, and I got it here. It was fully delivered on in these pages. Really, really strong character moments throughout the story. I can't talk specifically about any of, like, the lines that hit, but the lines that hit. Like, I got chills several times reading this book. I also think these flashbacks were fantastic. Talk about getting more from a lesser known about character. Like, we went so deep on this character and his lore, and it was so different from what I was expecting, which, again, I can't give you more information about that. Spoiler-free reviews are hard, but it was the opposite kind of what I expected this character's background to be. I think I'll have to write up my thoughts on this. I'll probably put a spoiler-filled review up on Goodreads and hardcover and Fable, because I do feel like I want to be a little more specific than I am allowing myself to be in this video. So I'm going to be doing that. But the journey, great. The destination, fantastic. And then the setup for, like, what to expect in future books in the Stormlight Archives, like future stories told on Roshar and beyond, I think was excellent. Like, I'm so ready for more. I don't know where he's going to take us, but I feel prepared for it. Like, I feel comfortable with the way that this story arc has ended, because there will be more Stormlight Archives books. It's going to be a long time, but there will be more. And I feel like that makes sense based on how this concluded. Like, I'm not saying that everybody's storyline is tied up with a bow and, they all lived happily ever after or whatever. I'm not commenting on that. You have to read to find out how everybody's storyline ends, but I'm just saying that they're all immensely satisfying. The pieces have been laid out well, and I feel very confident that Sanderson is going to be able to take us through the next part of this story, even though I know that it's going to be, I think, like 8 years, like 8 Earth years before we get a new book, and like hundreds and hundreds of Roshar years. Now, again, those negatives that I pointed out are all kind of small problems that I had with the story, but because of them, I am landing on like a 4.5 for this book. If you've read 1 through 4, you absolutely have to finish the story. It's 100% worth your time. Even though it felt long, I still think by the end that it did earn its page count. It's got terrific character moments, fantastic pacing, emotional scenes, and everything gets wrapped up in a way that is so deeply satisfying. I'm very sad that this arc of the Stormlight Archives has come to a close, but like I said, I'm very happy with the way that it was concluded. And that's it. If you've read this book, I would love to know what you thought on it. I think this is going to be a more divisive Sanderson book, and if that's the case and you really did not like this book, I would love you to let me know why that is down in the comments. I'm very excited to go and watch more reviews on this now that I've put my thoughts out there. I can't really wrap my head around why people took such issue with this book yet, so I'm very curious. Like I said, I'm going to try to put up some spoiler-filled thoughts on Goodreads and hardcover and Fable. I don't know when I'll do that, but I'm going to write up my thoughts with some additional details for sure on probably all 3 of those apps. I am currently keeping up to date on my Goodreads, my hardcover, and my Fable, so if you have any of those, feel free to follow along. I put the links up. There's nothing up there. I put the links down here in the description after every video, so you can always find them up there if you're curious. I update my page counts regularly as I read on all 3 apps and all that. So if you want a closer look into my day-to-day reading habits, feel free to follow along. And if you do want to follow me on Fable, I'm currently running a book club over there for The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu. It's one of his short story collections. We're going through them really slowly. We're reading just one short story every week and then talking about it. It's been a lot of fun, and like I said, they're short stories. We're going at a really slow pace, really easy to catch up. If you're interested, feel free, join in, join the discussion. You can catch up really quick, and we'd love to have you. And that is all I have for you today. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.